Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about how to play all-time wrestling. This is a video on a two-player game, 1v1. To set up, you first select your wrestlers. We've selected Kurt Angle and the British Bulldog. Place their respective player boards on the table. Also place the momentum meter you see here. Next, you get these yellow and red cubes. For the red cubes, place them on the highest number present in the health meter. So in this case, it's number 16. That's your maximum health and your starting health. In addition to that, you can do the same thing for your stamina bar. And this is the amount of energy that you have during the match, and you set it to the maximum. Next, you place the 1x and reversal tokens that you see here today into their place on each player board. And then you place the momentum marker and token here on the number 0 on the match momentum. Place the attack dice, place your player aids, and this is double-sided where you know what to do when you're attacking and defending. And finally, you select your respective deck. So in this case, Kurt Angle. You can see that on the back cover, it's clearly labeled. These are your attack cards for the game. And this is the British Bulldog's attack cards. And you draw 5 cards. You select whatever 5 cards you want as your starting hand, provided the damage on these cards does not exceed 9. And to see what the damage of each card is, that's the number next to the health icon that you see, or the heart icon that you see on each card. That's called damage, and you just have to make sure that the numbers here don't add up to higher than 9. So in this case, I have 1, 2, 3, and 5. Well, sorry, it shouldn't be 5. Let's take another card. 1, 1, 2, and 3, and that's 9 cards. Obviously, for your first game, just pick any 9 cards. But as you become better in the game, you can pick your own strategy by selecting what starting cards that you want to start with. The final thing to do before you start the game is to determine who is the first player. So each player rolls 1 die, and the higher die roll becomes the first player. Assuming Kurt Angle got the higher roll, what you do is you shuffle your hand, and you take one of those cards and you put it back into your draw pile, which is the rest of your deck. And you also reduce your stamina by 1. And this is because the first player always has the advantage, and this kind of compensates for that. One final thing I want to mention is your hand size is always 5 cards. You should not exceed that during the game. If you draw an additional card during the game and you have 6 cards, you always have to shuffle a card back into your draw pile, unless you're Jax Felix, who has a starting hand of 6 cards and a hand size of 6 cards to start the game. Next, we're going to be talking about how to play. All right, guys, so the first player now starts the game. He has the initiative, and the initiative basically means that you are the attacker. It's your turn to play cards. And you can do 2 things when you have the initiative. You can either skip your turn and hand over the initiative to the other player, and in compensation, you can increase your stamina by 3. So imagine your stamina was here during the game, you can gain 3 stamina, or you can draw 1 card from your draw pile, provided your hand size is never exceeded, right? So if you draw a 6th card, in this case, you have to shuffle one of your cards back into your draw pile. The other thing that you're going to be doing on your initiative, your other option, is to attack, which is, I think, what you'll be doing most of the time. And to attack your opponent, you select any card from your hand, and you place it face up on the table, declaring your attack. You'll notice that there's an icon here, an energy bolt. That's your stamina icon. This means that it requires 1 stamina to play this card. So in this case, I'm going to reduce my stamina by 1. And then if the defender chooses not to defend against this attack, and we'll talk about that later in the video, you can then go on and attack your opponent. And to attack your opponent, you roll a die, and the result has to be equal to or higher than the number you see here next to the target roll icon. So here it says 2+, so 2 and higher ensures that you have a successful attack. So if I roll, I get a 2, that's successful. And what happens after a successful attack is the following. You do the damage listed on the card. In this case, it's 1 damage. So we reduce the British Bulldog's health by 1. You also gain 1 momentum, and we haven't talked about momentum here. The reason momentum is important is if you start gaining a lot of momentum and you get into this yellow zone, on a roll or unstoppable, it makes it easier for you to play bigger cards like, for example, a released German suplex. So any card with an S or an F icon in the bottom left corner of the card is usually one of your signature or finisher maneuvers, and it usually requires a higher roll, in this case a roll of 4. If you have higher momentum, let's say you're on a roll or you're unstoppable, you would require a smaller dice roll. On a roll, you'd require a 3, it's -1, and unstoppable, you'd require, whatever number you see on the card, -2 here. So if you were unstoppable, this card would require only a roll of 2. And that's why building momentum is important during the game. After you deal the damage and you gain the momentum, the defender gains something in return. They either get to draw a card, and again, ensuring they don't exceed their hand size limit, and then they can gain stamina up to their maximum stamina. So that's the compensation of the defender. Next, after you're successful with dealing this card, you can trigger something called an offensive ability window. So the offensive ability window is, unlike any other game that you might be playing, once you're done with your attack, you don't hand over the initiative to your opponent. You actually continue attacking. You never lose the initiative unless your attack is unsuccessful or the defender stops you. So if I successfully executed this move, I get to go again. But before I do, I can trigger an offensive ability window, and there are 4 that we're going to talk about today. And 3 of them are going to be on the right side of any card you can play. Anything you see on the right is triggered during the offensive ability window. In this case, this card has a taunt icon. I can trigger a taunt. Or similarly, a clothesline, I can trigger a recovery icon. And both these icons, you can see what they mean here on your player board. You receive something in return. So for example, if you play a European uppercut and trigger the taunt icon, you gain 1 stamina, 1 momentum, and you get to draw 2 cards, provided you don't exceed your hand limit. But your opponent as well receives 1 stamina, 1 card, and would recover also 1 health, right? So you can see that every player might have different implications from the recovery or taunt icon, so read your player boards carefully. So that's the first thing you can do on your offensive ability window. Another thing you can do is you can trigger a combination, a combo, and this is in the advanced rules. And the way to do so is you look at this icon in the bottom right corner, if the card has one, and you can attempt to match a second card with it that would match either of the icons you see here today. So either a green circle or an orange circle. Let's imagine I actually played the punches card. I can then trigger this combo, and I can then play the European uppercut card, and as you can see, these symbols match, and I would attempt to initiate a combo. And the way you do so is you play this card, you reduce your stamina by 1, just like we described earlier. The defender can choose to defend, and we'll talk about that later on in the same way. And then you roll the dice, and if it's successful, and here's the key, if it's successful, you don't just do 1 damage, you do 2 damage. So putting a combo together, a circle combo together, allows you to add 1 damage. Another combos that you can do are these squared combos. Any squared combos that you can match. But instead of doing extra damage, it makes your target roll easier. So in this case, if you've played an overhead belly-to-belly suplex successfully, you can play the released German suplex, and instead of rolling a 4, you would roll a 3. So these combos are also an easier way to manage your luck and manage the dice rolls that you have. The third thing you can do, and these are prototype cards, so in the final version of the game, the pin icon will be on the right side of the card since it's an offensive ability window. You can trigger a pinfall, and this is how you win or you attempt to win the game. And we'll talk about that at the end of the video in terms of executing a pinfall or submission. So those are the 3 major things you can do. In addition to that, some of your characters will allow you to trigger an offensive ability window that is one of your character abilities that you see here on your player board. Every character has 4. In this case, Kurt Angle has an ability called Straps Off, After a successful attack of 2 or more damage, you gain 1 stamina, you gain 2 health, and you gain 1 momentum. One thing I want to make sure before we move on is these damage icons. You'll sometimes notice there's a negative number, you'll sometimes notice there's a positive number during the game. Anytime you have a heart icon with a minus number next to it, that's the damage you do to your opponent. Anytime it's a plus icon, that's health that you can recover on your own. All right, so let's say that you've played a card successfully, and you continue playing. Maybe you string a combo together. Maybe you play a third card and your momentum starts building up and your opponent's health starts declining. Eventually there will come a point where you might play a card where you're unsuccessful in your role, and you have an option here. So let's assume that I played any card, whether it's my first card or my second card, it doesn't matter. And I roll a die, and wow, that was lucky. Well, let's assume it's a die roll of 1, and I played a released German suplex. That means I'm unsuccessful in my attack. I have the option, instead of ending my turn here, I have the option of discarding any card in my hand, assuming that it's not a finisher. You can never discard a finishing maneuver, and a finisher is a card with a letter F. That you can never discard. And I'll put this on the side for now because we'll talk about it later. But what you can do is you can discard any card. You can put it in something called a discard pile, and that will allow you to re-roll your dice, and you can do that only once. And you can take another shot. In this case, I'm still unsuccessful. And so that helps you also manage your dice rolls. One thing I want to say is, before we talk about unsuccessful attacks, whenever you end your turn, either because you're unsuccessful or the defender has stopped you, all the successful attacks, so in this case punches and European uppercut, go into your discard pile. And the card that was stopped by your opponent, or that your roll was not successful, that you shuffle back into your draw pile and you draw another card instead, and your turn ends. So that's how you end your turn after successful and unsuccessful attacks. The unsuccessful card goes back into your draw pile. Any successful cards you've played go into your discard pile. All right, so we did talk about the finishing card. Before we move on to defending, the finishing card or the finisher can never be discarded. So even if you've played an ankle lock successfully, but for whatever reason you weren't able to beat your opponent, that goes back into your draw pile. Now, let's assume that the British Bulldog is now attacking me. I'm Kurt Angle. Some of my cards have been discarded. What can I do to stop the British Bulldog? Maybe he wants to play a move that I just don't want him to play, a sit-down powerbomb, and my health is low, and I'm worried that he's going to win the match. Well, there are a couple of things. Instead of relying on his dice rolls, I can do a couple of things. There are 3 things that I can do. Number 1 is at any point in time, I can discard any 2 cards except your finisher. Those goes into the discard pile, and you stop the attack dead in its track. The British Bulldog shuffles back this card back into his draw pile, and it's your turn again. So that's the most effective way to do this. Keep in mind that you only have 15 cards, so cards are a precious resource that you need to utilize. The second way is some players might adopt a strategy that is very benign. They might start attacking you and trying to chip away at your health with low cards like these. Eventually, if they play by the third card that they play that has damage 2 or less, so in this case 1 damage, 2 damage, imagine they've been successful. The third card they play that has 2 damage or less in a row, you can just spend 2 stamina at any point in time and stop the attack and gain the initiative. So that's the second way you can stop attacks. The third way is using your ability boards. Every wrestler has a reversal ability denoted by this reversal token. You can spend it, it's a one-time use. And that means in Kurt Angle's case, you spend 1 stamina, you do 1 damage to your opponent, and you gain 1 momentum. You can even trigger a recovery if you please, and you gain the initiative. Other wrestlers will have other defensive abilities. So Kurt Angle is famous for being a great defender. I'll look at one of them here, which is a one-time use. I have to spend this icon. I would use up 2 of my stamina, and I would do 2 damage to my opponent, gain 2 momentum, and I can pin my opponent. Now, if the British Bulldog is worried about, he doesn't want to get 2 damage, and he doesn't want me to gain 2 momentum, and he definitely doesn't want me to pin him, What he can do is he can use his reversal icon. So if he hasn't spent it already, he can use this reversal icon to stop me from doing the rest of the elements that you see on this card. The other thing he can do is, if he doesn't have a reversal icon or he doesn't want to use it now, he can try his luck by rolling a dice. And it's written here, opponent can counter by rolling 5 or more. And if I rolled a 4, so I'm not able to counter it. But if I rolled a 5, I would stop Kurt Angle from doing more damage or more momentum to me, and I would regain the initiative. So that's how this counter works and this particular ability. And that's how you defend against attacks. All right, so you want to win the game. How are you going to do this? Well, you got to trigger a pin icon. And most of the time, these are on the cards. You'll notice an Olympic Slam has a pin icon, an ankle lock has a pin icon. And you trigger it during the offensive window ability, and it will be on the right side of your card, as I mentioned. Once you successfully execute that move, instead of triggering any other offensive window ability, because remember, offensive ability windows, it's an or. You can't trigger more than one at the same time. So you trigger the pin icon, and you pin your opponent. Now, before we talk about pinfalls, just to recap, these are pretty difficult rolls, a roll of 6 or a roll of 5. That's why momentum is, you can try your luck, but that's why it's important to build momentum to try to ease your roll. That's why it's important to try to hit combos, so try to find cards that have an orange square that you can play before that will make your rolls easier. And obviously have enough cards in your hand that you can discard for a reroll if need be. Once you've pinned your opponent, assume you've hit an Olympic Slam and you've triggered your pin icon. What happens is, after you've dealt the damage and you've gained the momentum, you trigger the pinfall, and your opponent now is going to try to get out of it. So let's assume the British Bulldog has 5 health. In order to kick out, you need to roll a 5 or less, a total of 5 or less. You roll 2 dice, and in this case I rolled a 7, so I did not kick out from the Olympic Slam. Keeping in mind that you have 3 attempts. The referee counts to 3. So that's the first attempt. Second attempt, I rolled a 7 again. And the third attempt, I rolled a 9, so I lose the game. In order for me to kick out, I needed to have rolled a 5 or less. So if I rolled a 3 or 1 on any of my 3 attempts, I would have kicked out. Now, I know that you most of the time have 3 attempts to roll the dice to kick out. However, this can be reduced. And the way it can be reduced, and if the attacker wants to increase his chances of pinning you, is if your health is low, denoted by this white border around your health and this icon, it means that you get 1 less roll than usual. So if I hit the Olympic Slam and your health was 3, I would get 2 rolls as a British Bulldog. Similarly, if you hit your finisher, there's a -1 roll icon. That means you'll only get 1 roll because of your low health and your ankle lock. So this is a way where you can reduce the attempt rolls by the defender and try to dramatically and emphatically win the game. As a defender, let's assume you've been hit with a situation and you only have 1 roll to roll a 3 or less. You might not fancy your chances. You can counter that. So at any point in time when you're being pinned, you can spend 3 stamina to recover 1 health, and you can do it as many times as you want. So I can, if I started with 15 health, with 15 stamina, I can go all the way down to 0 and recover 5 health accordingly. And now I feel like I have a much better opportunity to kick out. Obviously, if you don't kick out, you lose the game, and that's the main way to win the game. All right, so you've hit the Olympic Slam, it hasn't worked, maybe the match keeps going, and you've eventually run out of cards. You've hit your opponent with everything, you just can't seem to pin him. And obviously the ankle lock will always remain in your hand because you can never discard this card, even if it's successfully hit, as you can remember. If you reach this point in the game, you take your discard pile, you shuffle it, and now you go into something called blind attacks. And what that means is, on your turn, you can choose to do one of 3 things. You can give up your turn and gain stamina only. You can't gain a card. You can play your finisher that's in your hand. You can always play that. Or you can take your chances and play whatever's at the top of the deck. So I unveil this, I have no idea what it is, and I need to play that card. Now, if you're in a situation where your stamina is low and you cannot afford a this blind attack, for example, because it requires 3 stamina, You need to keep drawing cards until you find a card that you can afford and you can hit. And again, this is up to you. If you exhaust your draw pile again, you lose the game. If both of players are now in blind attack mode and they've exhausted 8 cards from their draw pile, the match ends in a draw. The last thing I want to talk about is this low stamina. We talked about low health and how it affected you. When you have low stamina, you're at a higher risk of your opponent hitting you by this, if you can see that icon. So, if your stamina is 1 as Kurt Angle, the British Bulldog's sit-down powerbomb, if he uses this card, he doesn't need to roll a 4 or higher. He needs to roll a 3 or higher because you're too tired to defend yourself. And obviously, if he has more momentum or if he has put a combo together, that roll could be less and less. So you always have to worry about maintaining high enough stamina to avoid the scenario where it becomes very easy for the opponent to attack you. That is all the rules of the game. There's one final thing I want to talk about, which is a rampage attacks, which you can do on your turn. And rampage attacks are signified by cards that have this number 1 at the bottom. You can, if those are in your hand, let's assume those 3 are in your hand. At any point in time during your turn, instead of playing one of these cards, you have the option of playing any card with a rampage icon on it. And you play it together, and then you roll a dice. You roll 3 die. In this case, let's assume I'm rolling 2 dice because I'm doing 2 rampage attacks. And you get to then allocate each die to each card. So even if one of them was unsuccessful, you get to choose which one was unsuccessful. And then you get to trigger the offensive ability window of only 1 card. Now, if the defender blocks it, so assume I'm trying to attack you with these 3 cards and you say, no, I'm not going to have any of that. I'm going to discard 2 cards and I'm stopping this attack. All 3 cards go back into your draw pile and you draw 3 new cards into your hand, and obviously your attack stops. So those are all the rules of old-time wrestling. If you have any questions, please let us know. And we'll be posting other videos on the website that explain character abilities, different strategies. We hope you can check them out, and thank you for joining us.